Hey guys, welcome to Even Steven Money and Money Talk Friday. My name is Steven, aka Even Steven Money, and this week's topic is: should you invest your emergency fund? Well, guys, that's a tough question. But first, let's take a stab at an easy one. An answer. My name is Steven, and after paying off over $100,000 in personal debt, my wife and I found our version of financial freedom. It led me to where I am today. I launched my own money coach business at Even Steven Money. What I do is I help clients to create a plan. We want to pay off debt faster, save more money than they ever have before. Also, they can live a better life today and retire comfortable tomorrow. Guys, I always want to dive right in. That's how I work here at Even Steven Money, and that's definitely how we work on should you invest your emergency fund. So, guys, make sure when you do see me live, make sure to say hello. Make sure to put your name in the comments, where you're from. I enjoy all that stuff, really do. But, guys, what I like to do is talk about the intro a little bit. It gives a good outline of what we're going to talk about today. So, when I first started on my personal finance journey, I was reading everything I could get my hands on. So it seemed no matter which way I turned, everyone believes that you should have an emergency fund. So I agree there. And the only thing that people differ on really is how much you should have and where you should keep that emergency fund. So let's take a look into emergency funds a little bit further and why I chose to take a different approach and ultimately answer the question, should I invest the emergency fund? Hey, Scott, thank you for stopping by. Yeah, got the shirt. That's awesome. So a couple weeks ago, we did a Republic wireless giveaway. So the first people who stopped by, they were actually able to get some free merchandise from Republic Wireless. So that was pretty great. And Scott was one of the lucky winners. And there's a couple more out there. One, I got to give I'm actually going to see the person, so I'm going to hold on to that one. And then I'm still waiting for my pictures from the other winner, Lindsay. Scott, same thing. I would love to see a picture of you wearing the shirt, holding it up. Would really appreciate it, and I'll make sure to send that to Republic Wireless or put it in the Facebook Live here. So great to see that you got it. Um, Transitioning, right? We're talking about emergency funds. The what and the why is how I want to start. So an emergency fund, it's an amount of money that you set aside for occasions that the individual or the couple deems an emergency. It sounds simple enough, but what I like to do is I ask myself a question. And the question is this an unexpected expense or a bill that came up at a moment's notice? I really think if you ask that question when you're looking for your emergency fund, or if you're looking to see if it's an emergency, it's a great question to ask. So here's a couple examples that I think fit the bill. So if your car breaks down, that's an emergency. You got to pay for the brakes or the engine or all that stuff. An emergency room visit, you get stitches in your eye or whatever the case is, that's an emergency fund. Heavens forbid you lose your job, that's absolutely an emergency. That's something that was unexpected. Now, all of these are unexpected in some way or another. What I want to make really clear, though, is what an emergency fund should not be used for. And that's for everyday items or expensive items that you can't pass up. That is the wrong type of fund and the wrong type of emergency. So we want to stay away from using that as an emergency fund. Those would be like a sinking fund, for example, or just an account that you use for fun, as another example. But so your emergency fund, where does it start? Where should you start and how much should you have? Now, in big, bold, black letters, I want to say it out loud here. Everyone needs an emergency fund, period. So that hopefully was clear enough. I say it with, enthusiasm. So when I first started out, I chose to follow in the Dave Ramsey footsteps, and his baby steps said that you needed to reach $1,000 in an emergency fund before you started paying off debt. And that's one of the, really the big part of that statement there is the $1,000 in an emergency fund is when you have debt. And that's the route that I chose to do. Now, over time, I've become debt free. Thank goodness. It's a good place to be, and I hope everyone can join me. And so my personal approach has changed. I believe that to build an emergency fund, you want to have one that allows you to sleep at night, and that's going to be different for each individual person. Now, some people may have credit card debt, so having $1,000 in an emergency fund, that's probably what's needed, and that's what makes sense. But other people are going to be in different situations. They may have a job that it's not very stable. So you might want to have a larger emergency fund. You might want to have a 3-month or a 6-month or a 9-month. Now, the main important part is it's going to be one that allows you to sleep at night and one that really gives you a comfort level. And the next transition, so you know that you need one. Where should you keep it? So let's say you decided that you're going to do a 3-month emergency fund. Now, the really simple answer, and I'm a big fan of keeping things simple, especially for myself and for others, is just keeping a regular savings account. There's just a couple things to keep in mind with that. I think if you follow these 3 items, that you'll be all set. So as long as you keep your emergency fund separate from your checking account, you're going to be okay. So that's one, keeping it separate. So keeping it in a savings account, that would be 2. So something that's going to preferably earn interest in some way. And third is having it be liquid. So you want to be able to get your funds for that emergency almost immediately. Now, there's a number of ways that you can set up an emergency fund. There's a number of different accounts. I'll use some of the big banks out there. So the Bank of America, the Chase, credit unions. It doesn't really make a difference. A lot of those, you'll have a checking account, and then you also have an additional savings account with that. So you can have that set up as your emergency fund. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, you are probably not going to earn a very high interest rate. So you're not going to earn any significant interest on your money. So that may deter you a little bit. But they do have high yield savings accounts out there. A lot of those are going to be your online accounts. So your online banks, so your Allies, your Discover, Capital One, which is kind of maybe a little bit of both. But those are going to be more of a high yield savings account. And another item that's part of it as well is those are FDIC insured. So you have your money up to $250,000 that the federal government is really backing that in terms of if they would ever go under, if they would ever declare bankruptcy, that individual bank. So there's a number of things, right? I mean, you could keep cash in an old drawer. It's not the best way. You're not going to earn interest. If anything, you're actually, over time, it's bringing it down. But it's liquid. It's there for you. It's separate from your checking account. I think the one that it's missing really is just getting, having some sort of interest rate that goes with it. But, what if that doesn't work? I've got a question here. And I'm going to hit that up in just 1 second, but that's a great question. I'm going to transition here in just 1 second. And so it's really like, what if that doesn't work? Should you invest your emergency fund? And that's the question that we're going to ask. So before we get into, because I love being put on the spot. So before we get into asking the question of should you invest your emergency fund, I'm going to come back to that. And we had a great question from someone that I know personally. So YG Donovan asks, how do you compromise with your partner when you have different views on what you need an emergency fund? All right, let me make sure that and I'm clear and I understand it. So how do you compromise with your partner when you have different views on what you need an emergency fund for? So I'm going to make it based on reading that, just to make sure that it's really clear that the reason the question is what purchase you need for that emergency fund. So deciding if your car breaking down is an emergency. How do you compromise with your partner if you have different views on that exact emergency? It's a great question. And, I'll start out with it's all going to revolve around communication. So you have to start really talking with that individual and making sure that, if you aren't on the same page, that you get on the same page and why it's different. Now, I can't think of a specific example, but I'll use the car, right? Now, and I'll vary it a little bit. If your car is always breaking down, right, and your partner thinks that that's an emergency, that is an emergency, you need a different car, whereas the other partner says that's not an emergency, that's just something that, it's part of the car, we need to keep fixing it. Now, those are two separate views, and I think it's important to really talk about that and really make that decision. Now, for me, it goes back to asking the question, is this something that came up, and it came up really at a moment's notice? Now it sounds like in the example that I used, this would be reoccurring. So I wouldn't consider it and again, it's a different view, but I wouldn't consider it an emergency at that point. I think this is where you start to have the conversation of having a separate fund rather than your emergency fund. I want this to be for true emergencies, and I think the conversation needs to steer towards, okay, what fund do we need that's going to make you feel more comfortable and that you're in a better place, that really we are on the same page? So now if you said in that example, hey, you know what, I do want a different car, I want one that's more reliable, let's start a fund for that. Let's budget a little bit more for that item. And I think that's a great thing to do. But see how there was, maybe you weren't on the same page, emergency fund was here, and there's a different type of fund over there. And it really it starts with just having that conversation and understanding what's going to work for you and what's going to work for me and what you guys can agree upon. Because that's ultimately the most important part, is what's going to work for both of you. So I hope that answers your question, and it was a great one, and I'm sure it comes up a lot, deciding what an emergency is and what you're going to use to spend that money on. And there's definitely going to be different views, and it's never going to be perfect. Personal finance is certainly personal, and your views are going to be a little bit different than my views, and vice versa. So great question, and I thank you. I love questions, so if you are out there, I don't mind doing this one on the spot, but definitely send me an email, and send it through Facebook. I'm always looking for comments. This is definitely going to be a part of something I'm going to talk about later, which you may be interested in, getting your questions asked and answered. But guys, now I'm going to transition to what we were talking about before, and that's, should you invest your emergency fund? Because we're on Money Talk Friday with Steven, aka Even Steven Money. We have to ask our question. I had to ask myself a question. Is that something that you should do? And I decided to, I decided to just do it. I took a different approach. I was actually struggling to set aside the money for an emergency fund and keep it there, especially the keep it there part. Instead, what I would do is I would take that extra money and I would start paying off debt right away, no matter what the savings account I put it in. So whether it was at my bank account, whether it was online, I really did struggle. And it took a different approach for me to get excited about it. And the excitement came from actually investing my emergency fund and putting it in a company that had the potential to go up and actually down a little bit. And at that time, that really excited me. I don't know if it was a gambler's mentality or just needing something that savings account wasn't providing. And for me, I actually invested in an individual stock I invested in Nike. That's the just do it approach. What I ended up doing is I was able to contribute monthly. It was automatic, a monthly investment going in until I reached that $1,000. And I kept it there. I didn't sell. I had no problems not selling. And that was great. And that was really, so I had an emergency fund. And even after I, paid off certain debts, I decided that I was going to increase that emergency fund through that same investment. So I ended up having about 1 month's worth of expenses. And for me, it was the right thing to do. And essentially it forced me to save money. And, I would only use it in case of an emergency. And that decision for me, it was the right one. And I invested my emergency fund. Now, I also don't think this is the right thing for everyone. In fact, I wouldn't recommend it to most people. It just happened to work for me in, with my personal finance and my personal situation. I was someone who was willing to take more risk, and it may have not been the right move had certain things occurred. And I think that's why it's important to talk about the pros and the cons of investing your emergency fund. So I like to start with the pros. I'm definitely a positive person. So if an emergency fund happens, I had money saved up. And that's what it's all about, right? I had an emergency fund, so that's definitely a pro. It also allowed me to save money in a way that made me excited about an emergency fund. And now that's probably something you don't hear with emergency funds. I became excited. So definitely a pro for me. And what was interesting with this, I'm always about growing your knowledge. And in this case, I started to grow my knowledge with stocks. I increased my knowledge on, stock criteria. I learned about a little bit more about dividends and how it really worked. And, I was researching different companies and especially Nike at that time. So it was great. And, again, pro. Now, with the stock purchase and the emergency fund, what was really interesting is I didn't have to put any extra money in. And it actually allowed for the opportunity to grow not only with if Nike stock increased, but also with the reoccurring dividends that occurred on a quarterly basis. Now, the dividends are going to be very similar to your high yield savings account. Now, depending on how much that dividend yield is, of course. Now, Nike I believe, is actually probably about 1% at this time. So that's going to be less than your high yield savings account today, but definitely higher than your big bank, money market or savings account. So pro. Also, now this one's maybe a little bit of a stretch, but the ability to attend the Nike annual shareholders meeting. Now I have been to Berkshire Hathaway and certainly enjoyed that event. What is it? The Woodstock of capitalism. Now that was a lot of fun, and I've never been to a Nike guy. I haven't read too much about it. But imagine, this is how I imagine it. I see, Michael Jordan sitting up there on the podium or on one of the chairs. Phil Knight, maybe Charles Barkley. I don't know who's going to be there, but I think it would be fun if they did, and that would be definitely a pro for me, especially as as a pretty big fan of Nike and sports. Now, you can't talk about the pros unless you have some cons. Now, the cons, plural. This is very important. I think this is the number one thing that I want people to realize and look at and this is something that I needed to really probably do a better job of really deciding about this when I was going through it. And that investment account, it's not liquid. It's not as liquid as a savings account. Now, with that Nike stock, you would have to sell the stock, which while it's immediate, usually what's going to happen is it's going to take 3 to 5 business days to actually transfer that to your checking or savings account. And that's big. So you lose that liquidity. While it's a small amount, 3 to 5 days it's something, right? And most emergencies don't wait for a person to sell your stock to pay the bill. So that's really, to me, that's like 2 cons in one there. So that's a con. And it's important to realize, what are you going to do in the meantime? if those 3 to 5 business days you're waiting for that account, waiting for those funds, what are you going to do? And you start thinking, well, I'll put it on my credit card. Well, you don't want to do that, because that could also lead to another spiral. You might not pay a bill. You might forget. Now you can take it from your checking account. Now, what if you don't have enough money in there as well? Or, that could again be, it could spiral into a bad, really a bad thing that could happen. So you have to really consider that with that. Now, I mentioned, the stock growing and increasing in value, but what happens if it decreases in value? If your $1,000 in your emergency fund cuts in half to 500, you're going to have to replenish it and put it back up to $1,000. So it decreasing in value is absolutely a con. Now, when you're selling your stock, you may have to pay a small fee associated with that stock. So it might be free, but it could cost $5 or $6 per every time that you sell. Now with a savings account, you just withdraw the money. So that is definitely a con. You'd have to pay a fee, most likely, to sell your stock. So keep that in mind. Now with a savings account, I will make one little technical jargon note, is that you have to treat your savings account as a savings account. I believe the maximum withdrawal per reg, I think it's Reg D, is you have 6 withdrawals per month without receiving some sort of fee or penalty. So keep that in mind. They want you to treat your savings account like a savings account, not like a checking account. And last but not least, I will have to pay taxes on any profits and dividends. So you need to really keep that in mind as well, because after you sell, you may have paid that fee. Now you're actually paying taxes on the profits and dividends. As always, consult your tax professional for specifics. I'm not a tax professional. I just play one on TV. No, I don't even do that. All right, guys. So I've had an emergency fund journey of sorts. I started with a savings account, put it in the big bank. I ended up moving it to an online savings account, and I did what we talked about just now, which is I moved that into my Just Do It fund, my Just Do It investment fund. And I moved, and this may even be not as kosher with everyone out there, but I moved it into a Vanguard money market account, which it's essentially a high yield savings account, but the big difference is it's not FDIC insured. So if Vanguard, for whatever reason, were to go bankrupt, I would not be able to get my money back, whereas an FDIC insured account you would. So there is some risk associated with that. And I've even made kind of running a little bit of a test and see how it goes and how we feel about it, is I've actually recently moved our emergency fund into a bond fund. And I did that because of the high yield. And it kind of goes back to what we talked about before in terms of the pros and the cons. But we're going to test it out, see how we feel about it. I decided to up our portfolio into bonds. And part of that is because we do have some cash on the side right now that we're still looking to make decisions on. But that's where I am today. And, we're all faced with, our own journey. And what I do as a money coach at Even Steven Money is I really help you on that journey. I help people to create a plan. Really, it's a roadmap. And with that roadmap, we're working together to create a financial plan to pay off debt faster, save more money, and take the stress out of money. It's all about living a better life today and, retiring comfortable tomorrow. And that's what we all want to do, right? Is pay off debt, save money, and live a better life today. Where can you check me out? Where can you find all this good information and find out if we're a good fit and if this is something for you? Really, where can you take action? And that's the most important part. It's at evenstevenmoney.com/moneycoach. You'll be able to find it if you just go on evenstevenmoney.com. See if we're a good fit. We will have, you can schedule a phone call where we talk I set it up for 15 minutes. A lot of times we dive into some, it's one of your first chances to talk about what's going on in your personal finance and your journey and what's going right, what's going wrong. So it takes a little bit longer sometimes, but I love all that stuff. I love people who are looking to take action. Guys, I love doing this. I'm on Facebook Live almost every Friday. And next week's topics actually for the blog is going to be an interview of sorts with Fiery Millennial, who I would consider the top female millennial fire blogger out there. So Fire is financial independence, retire early. But I actually did a video with her earlier this past week, and make sure to check out, the only way to get that is on my YouTube channel. And now I'm going to post here the link for YouTube. I definitely want you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Put it in, this is going to be on Facebook, but it's also going to be on YouTube as well shortly. So make sure to subscribe to that on YouTube, and you can see Gwen and I from Fire Millennials talking about a little bit of everything. She's got a great story. So she went really, really hard into the fire movement, and she's recently made a lot of changes, and I would even say she's taken a step back in living her life and living it at kind of how I talk about, and that's, living your best life today. And we also have a little bit of a rivalry. I'm a Cubs fan, she's a Cardinals fan, so we had some fun, some candid fun there. But guys, as always, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, thank you for everything that you do with checking out Even Steven Money, whether it's the blog, YouTube, social media. I enjoy doing this. I hope you get something out of this. I hope you're growing your knowledge. I hope you're getting better with your money, because that's what it's all about. If I can help one person, I really think it's worth it. So until next week, make sure to check out evenstevenmoney.com. Subscribe everywhere so you can get the information as soon as possible. Until then, have a great week, and I will see you guys next time.